Land Rover and Range Rover, four-wheel drive vehicles with a reputation for functioning in extreme conditions and environments. How do the techniques for driving them differ from other vehicles? Before we see the vehicles in action, let's familiarize ourselves with the controls. As you can see, the general layout of the instrumentation is quite conventional. The key to operating them is the transmission, which is controlled by the two levers shown here. A normal 5-speed gearbox. And below it, the transfer lever, whose first task is to control the movement between low and high range gears. And secondly, to operate the differential lock, which is fundamental to driving over slippy or uneven terrain. When engaged, this warning light will appear on the fascia panel. Engaging differential lock simply ties the front and rear axles together to improve traction, and as you'll see later, is essential to good driving technique. You'll notice that the gear selection has bias along the line of third and fourth, with pressure to the left engaging first, second and reverse, and movement to the right locating fifth gear. Pay attention to the position of your thumbs around the steering wheel. That's the painful way. This is the correct position, avoiding any quick movements of the wheel. How all these controls are used in practice will become clear as we now demonstrate the correct and sometimes not so correct driving techniques by comparing the performance of two vehicles around a series of obstacles in different terrains and environments, illustrated by these maps. This diagram will appear on screen to show whether the driver has engaged the differential lock and what gear has been selected. Now a quick look at the vehicles involved. Red is a 90 V8 County, fitted with 750 by 16 Michelin XCL tyres. White is identical, but has 205 by 16 Michelin M&S tyres. One purpose of this film will be to show you how vehicles with tyres of different sizes will require different gear selections and techniques. The white Land Rover will also relate to the techniques for driving a Range Rover in similar conditions. The first obstacle. We're starting off relatively easy with a drive from tarmac onto grass, through some ruts, and finishing by fording a stream. Simple enough. Well, let's see how they perform. Red starts. Off the tarmac and down the loose track. Through the ruts in the correct gear, no wheel spin, not a slip. After straddling the previous section of ruts, Red has now stopped to engage low range. He's dropped his wheels into the ruts, and that's a good start by Red. It's important to drive the vehicle with the accelerator pedal, using the brake and clutch to the absolute minimum. Right, white's away now. Onto the track and down the slope. Well, mistake number one. he's forgotten to engage the differential lock. It's bound to cause him trouble because this is a slippy, grassy track. Without the differential lock, the power is not equally distributed to both axles. Which is exactly what's happening to White here, causing him to lose traction. Okay, differential locks now engaged. A quick reverse out of trouble. And a second attempt. This time looking much better. Like Red, White also opts for the ruts. But he hasn't engaged low range. First high didn't give him complete control of the vehicle. Braking would cause him to slide. And as we saw, immediately he gained traction near the stream, he veered off in the direction his wheels were pointing. For controlled off-road descents, always use first low. Right, on to obstacle 2, a bog, where we have the vehicles drop down a bank, across a marsh and stream, and out twice. Red's down the bank in first low, changes gear at the bottom to second low to provide that momentum through the marsh. Up the bank perfectly, and on to part 2. Down now the second bank and into pretty sticky deep mud, but with the right gear for the 750 by 16 tyres, Red has no problems. Through the last stream now and up to the final bank, to the finish. White's down the first bank. This time he's going well. But White's first attempt at the bank in third low fails. He reverses for more momentum, but still no good. I think he's realized the gear's too low, creating wheel spin. Fourth low now gets him up nicely. White is reading the ground, assessing the problem, and choosing the right gear to solve it. So, down the bank, in first low, into the second section of the bog, in third low, well in by the look of things. His first attempt fails. Tries now, in first high. Still no good. Now he changes to fourth low. He's moving forward. Slowly, slowly. He's through. A combination of the right gear plus turning the steering to get grip from the tyre sidewalls gets him through that very typical boggy ground. An ascent followed by a descent on a wet meadow is next. It might seem simple enough. The skill, though, is in selecting the right gear to suit the conditions. Red turns and ascends the meadow, approaching the climb at 90 degrees, the right gear, and maintaining the power gets him to the top. Takes the differential lock out on the tarmac, and then stops to transfer to first low for the descent. But this time forgets to re-engage the differential lock. See his wheels slip and slide? That's not an optical illusion. The wheels are actually turning in opposite directions. The driver is out of control. White's first attempt at the ascent in third low fails. Too low a gear created wheel spin again. His second attempt is in first high, with the differential lock, of course, but he's much too slow and stalls it. Foot on brake, quickly into reverse low, turns the key and descends, feet well clear of the pedals. Notice his hand position on top of the wheel to avoid oversteering. It's most important on a slope to get the vehicle into low-range reverse as quickly as possible, as the gearbox should control you, whatever the ground conditions. White reselects high range now, and a faster approach gets him to the top. Disengages the differential lock on tarmac, then reselects the differential lock and low range for the descent, which he does perfectly, under control. Well, next we have the water section. The vehicles enter down this rocky bank and then literally drive in and out of the river in full flow. This is quite a challenge, even for the most experienced drivers. Here's Red entering the water first, from the rocky ledge. Moving forward calmly, keeping the speed and momentum of the vehicle just right to avoid stalling on the one hand or rushing into trouble on the other, and steering selectively around obstacles or sudden dips. As Red drives off to the second section, White now descends the track at the start of his first crossing. As selective steering is important, let's watch White in close-up. Perfect. Finding the high points to avoid damage. Look at the movement of the suspension. Not so good in the water, however. He's rushing a little. He could get stuck or damage the vehicle. And yes, he's had to reverse back from a problem. Well, he's taking this last section a little more carefully now. And he's through. And on to the second section. The second section of water is deeper, but not so rocky, requiring a different approach from the drivers. Here's Red approaching the water. He turns to go upstream into the deep water. He's driving too fast this time, creating a large bow wave, which would make his electrics very damp if he's not careful, or cause water ingress into the air cleaner. And yes, he's stalled. Red will now have to utilize the electric winch to tow himself to the bank. First, he plugs in the control cable. Then, pulls out enough slack to allow him to wade and attach the sling around a tree. Tensions the cable, checking it's fed onto the drum in the correct way, and back inside the cab, he can operate the winch and steer. After drying the electrics, the engine starts, forcing out water that has entered the exhaust. Up the bank, across the meadow, didn't see him test his brakes though, and finish. Safe and sound, if a little wet. Well, White panicked in the early section. How's he going to handle this deeper water? Well, it's looking good. A perfect bow wave. This bow wave forms a depression, keeping the engine bay almost free of water, preventing the air intake and electrics from getting wet. You can see White applying his brakes to dry them out after immersion. Under the banner to finish. Back on dry land, this next section involves 4 very common obstacles: a flat gully, crossing a ditch, crossing a gully, and traversing a V-shaped gully. Red starts by dropping into the flat gully. Look at that mud. And exits badly. He approached the slope at an angle and slid off. Involving him in a lengthy maneuver to drive out. Now White descends into that mud. Remember, he has the 205/16 tyres. White, however, is doing it correctly by driving past the exit, then reversing to give a better angle for the ascent. He may have done the first part right, but bad gear selection and lack of momentum means he's ended up taking as many goes at it as Red. Here's Red, slowly approaching the ditch square on. Not the way to do it. Now his second attempt at the correct angle of approach is a lot more successful. White gets it right first time. This sequence shows in detail the correct technique, approaching the ditch at an angle. The trick is to have one wheel only in the ditch at any time. Red now crosses the gully. Down in first low, changing up to second low to help accelerate, and he's over. Let's see if White thinks about his smaller tyres when selecting the gears. Obviously not. Now selects the right gear, and no problems. We now find Red dropping into that V-shaped gully. Red's worried about the bank on the driver's side and is slowly steering up the opposite bank. The danger here is that you slowly drive up one side until you exceed the safe angle. See what I mean? Red safely through the finish banner. Let's see if White can avoid disaster. It looks good. Keeping his wheels straight by selective steering. A driver's eye view. down and under the banner. A different form of obstacle now, involving towing a large caravan from a wet grass field onto tarmac. An overtaking sequence, a three-point turn, and then back to the finish. Having started in low range, Red transfers to high on the move. He drops revs, double declutches, and selects high range, also disengaging the differential lock when on the tarmac. In this overtaking sequence, Red is correctly compensating in his steering for the force of the lorry's pressure wave. Red now approaches the three-point turn, probably the trickiest maneuver when towing. He selects low range, doesn't slip the clutch. It's very tight. Yes, and back under the finish banner. White has started off with no differential lock, hence the lack of traction. Doesn't compensate with his steering very well either. Did you see him wobble? But he forgets to engage low range for reverse. Look, now he's slipping the clutch. Yes, it's taking him a lot longer than Red. He's finally through and heads for home. What's happening here, though? This swaying motion is caused by incorrect tyre pressures. The classic error when towing is not trimming the load horizontally. Now back to the obstacles with a steep and muddy descent followed by an ascent of equal difficulty, finishing with a track through holes and deep ruts. Red starts to descend in first low, using the engine to brake. Along the bottom, still going well. Now, up the ascent, the correct gear, making it look easy. He turns at the top. Ah, wrong way. He reverses. But of course, he can't turn out of these ruts. He now has to reverse the way he came to take a new line to enable a fresh approach to the hill. finishes his ascent and under the banner. White now descends, a little on the quick side. Oh, very bad. He's braked. Look at him toboggan out of control. Luckily, he's had the sense to take his foot off the brake and accelerate to gain traction. White's also having difficulty on the ascent. Don't forget, though, he has the 205/16 tyres, but is slowly making progress using the steering technique. This is typical Land Rover country. The final obstacle takes place on a hillside in the Lake District. The vehicles cross the side of a hill, down a descent, and turn up a very rocky path. He is red. He climbs. Turns and traverses the slope, keeping well within the limit of the vehicle and avoiding holes or projections that could tip him. He descends carefully under control. And climbs up the path, keeping his tyres on the high points by steering selectively. He's maintaining his momentum nicely up the track to the finish. White's turn. He's taking it casually on this traverse. Just saves himself by steering slightly downhill. Also taking the descent too quickly, becoming out of control, which could be dangerous. White also forgets to steer selectively, hitting the differential case more than once on his way to the finish. Well, that's the last obstacle. And I think you'll agree that Land Rover and Range Rover are without doubt the finest four-wheel drive vehicles in the world. Control them with thought and care, and the full extent of their capabilities in all environments will be yours.